Hi, Mike Urness here, and welcome to another episode of our 3x3, where we take 3 business questions that we've heard from our customers, business leaders throughout the week, and we answer them in 3 different ways. The first way is from a strategic standpoint, and a little bit more higher level. Second way is going to be more of a tactical, what can I do today to actually implement this or fix this question or help this question or respond to this question. And then the third one is more of a metaphysical way, a little more of a psychological self-help, kind of blending personal development and business and how to approach, more from that standpoint. So without further ado, our 3 questions for this week are going to be around how do I hire better? How do I manage my board more effectively? And finally, how do I better use KPIs? We always talk about KPIs in different ways, it seems like, but questions keep coming up and we're going to keep trying to answer them in different ways. So let's start with the number one, and that is going to be, how do I hire more effectively? Strategy response, and that is going to be starting with the embracing this idea that really at the end of the day, although there's lots of different strategies and ways of getting this done, we don't hire that well. None of us do, and it's just a falsity. And so that doesn't mean you shouldn't try, and you shouldn't, put up processes and have multiple steps and use various types of evaluations. But at the end of the day, don't get too hung up on that. Do the basics and really focus on the second aspect, which is firing well or letting people go that don't have a fit. And that doesn't mean that we want to have that happen. It just means that we have a lot more control over the diagnosis of how well somebody's going to do within our organization long term, a whole lot better when they're with us, compared to when we're evaluating them really from while they're in the outside world. So question would be then is you've got 90 days plus or minus to really sort out whether they're a long-term player for you or not. So from a strategy standpoint, no question, embrace the idea that we're never going to be all that good at hiring, and we really should be, and we have a lot of control over how well we're able to then take the next 90 days and figure out whether there's a really good fit or not. So that would be a strategy. Number 2 is going to be from a tactical. Okay, well that's great strategy, Mike, but what can I do like right now to try to improve that area? And so let's take your either most recent hire or your upcoming hire, and let's evaluate how good do you have it for them in terms of how clear is their job description? How clear is it for them to understand what does it take to be successful? Terms like critical success factors, performance types of numbers, workflow process or business processes for them to understand, study, develop, the skill sets. Those areas are really important for setting up your employee for success, as well as, going back to the strategy side, as well as for us to diagnose whether they are a fit or not. We've also talked a lot about core values. That needs to be part of this. Like, we need to be able to understand in the first 90 days, really, they probably answered the core value question well in the interview, but how are they performing and how are those core values coming to fruition, in the execution of what they should be doing? So tactically, again, evaluate your environment for the new hire. Is it clear enough process, or are there clear enough processes? Is there clarity around what does it take to be successful? Are the skill sets called out, and is there a feedback loop to help them understand, as well as you and your team to understand how are they doing? And then are you using that people evaluator strategy of your own core values to figure out socially and from a value standpoint, are they going to be a good fit long term? You got 90 days plus or minus. The faster you can make that determination, obviously the better it is for everybody. And the ultimate goal is we keep them forever, right? So this is not a way of trying to be a quick fire and there's no bravado around it. It's just practical ways of looking at, is there a fit or is there not? And then from a metaphysical standpoint, or a little bit more of that psychological standpoint, the question I'd have for you to think about is, what's the dynamic of expectations? Like, is the expectation that we are giving you money, right? So there's a compensation package, and then it's more of we sit back and we go, and now you have to dance, now you have to perform, versus Here's a compensation package. You're giving us your time and your effort and your emotion and goodwill. And I'm still on the hook as a leader of the organization or as a leader of a team to do everything in my power to help you be successful, to really coach you into success or set up the dynamics so you can, make it through those hoops that are required. And it's not like any person is in one or the other necessarily. Sometimes maybe, but most of the time it's more of a continuum, kind of going back and forth of that attitude of you owe me because I'm paying you, to God, I really want to see you be successful, so I'm going to do a few things. The majority of the time, where's your mindset? Is it in the support? Are you working for them? Or is it more on the you owe me? To the degree that you have the you owe me, there are going to be problems that are going to show up. They're going to show up both in terms of even more pervasive through the team, as well as your likelihood of success. And again, in no way, shape, or form am I saying that you should come off them delivering on what they need to do for their particular job description. But what I'm saying is along that journey, it's going to be beneficial for you to be able to support that, nurture it, and really hope for their outcome, their positive outcome, versus feeling like we've done what we were supposed to do by, fulfilling on paying you what we said we would pay you and give you the compensation package that we said we would. So that's a mindset and a real tactical execution concept. Okay, question number 2, and that is, how do I better manage or collaborate with my board? And that's a great one because it's one that actually it can be looked at from a broader lens than just if you are literally going to be a company leader at this point in time that has a board. There's lots of company leaders that don't, or there's people that aren't necessarily company leaders that still report to an individual, and then they have other people at that higher tier that they engage with. So it could be broader, but let's look at it from that specific question that we're addressing, and that's how do I better manage my board. Strategically, there's an answer, and that is, and it's really some potential concepts, but strategically, it is using the idea of an agenda more effectively and using the concept of parking lot of conversations more consistently, or even using it period at times. So the idea around using an agenda better really means that you as the leader are going to do a great job of identifying what is the upcoming meeting, what does it need to do, what are the objectives, what am I trying to accomplish, what do I need to share, and make sure that you have a real clear agenda and you stick with that. And you stick with it by the second part of that strategy, which is using parking lot concepts of when board members bring things up that aren't in alignment or don't really fit into the context of what's being talked about at that particular time, they either get deferred into when it is going to show up in the meeting, but a lot of times it happens that it really isn't a place for that particular topic in the meeting, so we need to move it to someplace else. Being respectful and being organized, it typically is a parking lot concept, which is there is a dedicated place to put this so everybody knows that it will be revisited and it will come back into the conversation. It's just not going to happen right now. So use those two things from a strategic standpoint. From a tactical standpoint, like what's something you can do right now to improve your overall dynamic with your board? One thing is you can use the strategy or the idea of asking the question why. So for example, board member asks, say, hey, it seems like we should, or I would like to have us better understand what our buyers' personas are, or who our buyers are. It doesn't feel like we know them well enough. And that question really could go a bunch of different directions. One, creating more homework and chaos for you that's hard to chase down, especially with limited resources and time. Or it can be investigated and better understood and managed a little bit differently. So that would be through the use of the questions of why. So for example, that question goes out. So the question by the board member was, what could I want to look at better understanding who our customers are, so so we can have more clarity on who's working with us. You, utilizing the strategy of why, can then ask, It's something to this effect, and saying, great question, or good strategy. I know that's an important concept, but I'm curious, what's behind that question? Like what are you trying to accomplish by doing this, and what's going on there? And so with that, the board member may look a little puzzled initially, but then they can answer the question relatively quickly. And it will sound something like, in this made-up example, they could say, well, I just feel like our lead generation isn't quite where it needs to be. And so I feel like if we better understand what our customers look like, we can do a better job in that space. Fair enough. So then we still go with our why, and we ask, that makes sense. And so lead generation is certainly an area that could always be improved, but it still feels like there's something underneath that. So why are you asking that question? Like, what's going on there? Well, it's really about the revenues, and it feels like we're going to talk today about decreasing our forecast, and it just feels like revenues are a bit of a weak link right now in terms of what we're trying to do. So really, what the motivation behind the question ended up being was more in the revenue area and the change in the forecast. So now, we're able to bring it from an outlier into something that really probably is core to what we're talking about, and that's going to be, in the revenue forecasting arena. So your response at that time could sound something like, well, I'm glad you're bringing that up, because yes, we are going to talk more about, we have this agenda item over here, where we're going to be talking about the forecast, we're going to talk about our revenue expectations and what's going on there, and let's go through that, and then we'll see what needs to be done as an outcome from that. Does that sound fair, Mr. Board Member? And of course they'd say yes, and we continue on. So the outcomes are, again, quite different. One is, now you have a monkey on your back, you have a piece of homework that you may have to run down, or you may have to have that uncomfortable conversation at some point saying you can't do it because of whatever you don't have at the time, or you're able to use that why type of questioning strategy to really try to get to the nub of what's going on and see if it probably is something more fundamental, which it almost always is. And it's typically closer to home, the things we're already working on. So again, a real tactical thing. There's lots of literature out there in terms of using the question of why. There's a little bit of skills involved. As always, we'll be happy to talk to you a little bit more about that if you have any questions. But that would be an example of a tactical execution. And then on the more the metaphysical side of things, it really comes down to a universal concept that's out there, and that is the person who has the most clarity, right? The most clarity and conviction, they are the ones who are going to win in any engagement. So if you're sitting there as a board member or as a company leader, and you have more clarity on the direction you want this conversation, the meeting, the agenda to go, compared to the rest of the board, or compared to that person that asked the question about the lead generation or the personas, you're going to win just out of nature of having more clarity. And so if you want to have more alignment, or more control, with your board, then have more clarity as to what needs to happen, and that will serve you big dividends. So I hope that helps on the board management side. And then finally, the third thing that we're here to talk about is going to be in the area of KPIs. And again, lots of different directions we could go with KPIs, but let's start with a strategy way of looking at KPIs. KPIs really are about seeing the future in advance. So they're about getting our conversations, our dialogues, our meetings about what's happening today, that if we change behaviors, change activities, make decisions on things today, we have an ability to affect what's going to happen tomorrow. And although it sounds almost logical, it's too logical to say this out loud, the fact is most of our meetings are about results and what's taken place. And so we look at reports, we look at information, but those things, that war's been fought, and they are results. So better to have the key performance indicators in our key management meetings, where they really are indicators for what's happening right now that's going to give us a likely outcome later. So it provokes the conversation around what behaviors are we going to change, what activities are we going to do right now in order to affect and have more of a positive outcome on the discussions we're ultimately going to have when we're looking at our financial reporting. So that's the strategy side, and it's really around just getting forward thinking and having forward discussions, better, more consistent discussions about things that we can affect. On a tactical standpoint, so what can we do today to improve our KPIs? An easy one is going to be in the areas of sales, right? So the KPI and indicator in any business is going to be around what's going on in the sales pipeline and come down to hit an ultimate result around revenues and profits and things like that. So in the KPI world, it would be, this actual question came from a professional service leader, and so that specific answer is going to get a little bit lower in the funnel because of the amount of complexity and time that goes into before an event like a proposal. So a proposal, number of proposals being sent out or presented in a period of time is oftentimes, in a little bit more of a complex sales cycle, a really good indicator for what revenues are going to look like somewhere between a month, 2 months, 3, 4 months, down the road. And so that could be a KPI that needs to show up. And it's not that this is a novel concept in terms of, well, I never thought about a proposal being an indicator. It's like, of course, you've thought about these things. The question is more around, how well are we using them, and where are those dialogues showing up, and how early are those things showing up? So revisiting your sales pipeline, your reporting process, and seeing where those indicators, numbers are being presented and talked about in your management meetings. And so in this case, yes, making sure that a proposal, or let's say in a little bit of a less complex type of environment that has a shorter sales cycle, maybe it's around the number of new qualified leads that are showing up. And where does that KPI need to show up in, other than just in a marketing meeting or just in a sales meeting? Because oftentimes those indicators can change the dynamics of other meetings in terms of more global macro management meetings also. KPIs, really important. Again, the tactical suggestion is make those things more visible. Take the concept from, yes, I know I should, and yes, I kind of know about these things, to actually having dialogues with your teams faster as a result of it. And then from a more of a metaphysical standpoint on your KPIs situation, it really comes down to the idea of knowing that KPIs are almost like the emotions in us. When we look at our being, we're oftentimes referred to as a three-centered being, where we have mental, and we have physical, and we have emotional. And when we look at a company, it's very similar in the sense that we have the thinking, which is living in the past. And so it really is looking back on the results that have taken place and the analytics that go into those types of things. The physical is more the structure of the business itself, and the emotion has to do with those KPIs, the things, the activities, the results that are taking place now that are really more forward and future looking than what takes place in terms of actual thinking and results. Tying that back into the body, yes, we think of our body as being the physical aspect here in the moment. Oftentimes when you think about meditation and various mindfulness tactics, we always refer back to our body to be present in this moment. We know that thinking and thought is always taking place in arrears, kind of like our financial reporting. So that's a past looking indicator. And then we have our emotions, which are ahead of us, and oftentimes are thought to be more in the realm of precognition. Same thing in business with our KPIs. And so hopefully that's a little bit of a correlation and helps you think about business a little bit differently, from that structure standpoint. And that's going to wrap up today in our 3x3. As always, please make sure you ask us questions, make sure you subscribe, and we look forward to hearing from you and working with you more as we move forward. Thanks.